In this video, I'm going to be using Microsoft Excel to pull some data off of a web page, prepare it a little bit, and then do a visualization. Now, Microsoft Excel, a lot of people are familiar with, very common application for spreadsheet usage. What a lot of people aren't familiar with is a lot of the extra functions it has. Now, there are a lot of things that Excel can do that other specific purpose-built applications can do a lot better. But what's nice about Excel is there's not a lot of overhead necessary to learn how to do some very powerful functions using it. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to pull some data off of a website. I'd like to take this and put it into a spreadsheet so I can do some analysis on it, make a chart. What this is a listing of the average user rating of The Simpsons on Internet Movie Database. This is a fairly large table, and I'd like to have access to it as it is right now. So what I'm going to do is, first off, you need to copy the URL, and then in Excel, you go to the Data tab and click From Web. This is going to launch a little browser. I'm going to paste in the URL and hit Go. Now, it's going to load the page, and then it's going to take some time to process it because it needs to look for elements that it can import. I'm going to be looking for something that's in a table element, which is fairly straightforward, but you'll notice that it also will give outlines for different elements like divs. Now, when I import something, it generally does this in that it says that the page is not responding. It will have a little rotating circle telling me to wait. If you start clicking around, you might get a Windows error and it'll force the application to close. But if you're just patient, within around a minute, it will finish processing and you'll notice it'll stop saying not responding, and you'll get a little collection of arrows next to different elements of the page. So we'll just wait for the time being. Alright, so now we can see that we have these arrows, and when you mouse over it, it will highlight the section of the screen that it's going to try and import data from. I want this table, and when I mouse over that arrow, it's very clear that it's looking at the specific table element. Check it off, and then click Import. It can go right at the beginning of the first worksheet, and it'll take a second to retrieve the data, put it into columns and rows. So there's the imported data set. We can see the episode number, and the name, the user rating, and the number of votes, and then the final column represents the pane where you can vote in, and they've taken the icons of the number of stars, probably the alternate text, and put that here. And because this is meant to be clicked on, doesn't offer us anything useful, I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm also going to add two columns. Now, two different things that I'm going to want to do with the data is to look at it as a progression of episodes, and right now I have it sorted in order. But when I put it into a pivot chart, there's nothing that's going to maintain that. It's just as it was presented on the website. So what I want to do is I want to have the absolute episode number, and I also want to have the season that it's from, and I want them to be separate. So episode number is probably the easiest one to go about. I'll just name the top of that EP no, and of course that is the first one, and will be a progression by 1, so I'll say that the second is to be E2 plus 1. Take the autofill handle, drag that to the end. This looks like incomplete information, we'll just clean up. And now we have the episode number. I also want to get the season number, and I can take that from the column denoted with the pound symbol as anything before the decimal place. Now there's a few ways you can go about doing that. You can use string manipulation functions, but as this is viewed as a numeric, I'm going to use a numeric function on it and get rid of everything after the decimal place with the floor function. I'll call this season. So I'm going to look at A2, and I want to the nearest 1, and we have season 1. And you'll see as I drag this down, as we're using a relative reference at 532, it points to A532 and does the same. So now we have all the episode numbers, we have all of the season numbers, and one last thing I'm going to do, and this isn't necessary in this case, but it's a good habit I like to get into, is once I'm done doing calculations with formulas and none of that is going to change, nor do I want it to change, I like to lock it in by copying the columns and then pasting the values. Just in case anything happens and things get moved around or out of order, you won't have to worry about it pointing to a reference that might not be accurate anymore. Like I said, in this case it's probably not necessary, but I find it's a good habit to get into. So, Control A to select the entire contiguous range. We're going to insert it, and I'm going to make a pivot chart. Now, first thing I want to do is, by default, it goes to a column chart. So I want to change it to a line chart because I want to show a progression. And the metric that I'm interested in is the rating. What is the average rating per episode? So I can take the sum of the rating, and each episode has, the website itself is outputting the average already. So there's only going to be one per. So in this case, the sum will work fine because it's always just the one. And I'm going to drag out the episode number to the axis field, and now we can see the progression over time. And this is also why I changed the initial data to have an absolute number instead of showing 1.1, 1.2, and so on, and I'll show you right now why. By default, it's sorting, and because it's a numeric type, it's sorting it in numerical order. If instead of the calculated field that I created, we use the actual one that was output from the website, numerically it's going to go 1.1 followed by 1.11, 1.12, and so on and so forth. So you'll end up having the seasons progress correctly, but within the seasons not quite. So for accuracy's sake, what we'll do is we'll leave that with the number I generated. Now, as this is a line chart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the axis a bit. So we can see that nothing goes below a 5 except for one apparently very substandard episode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of most of that just to bring out the differences a little bit. What you'd want to make sure you're doing as well is, if you were just publishing this chart on its own and you didn't have a video explaining it, you'd want to make sure that somewhere in the labels you had said that this was a scale from 0 to 10. Just for the clarity, a bit more honest doing it that way. So we're going to go into the axis properties and set the minimum to a fixed value of 5. And we can see it's making a bit better use of the space now. You see the progression a little more clearly. However, this is still a fairly jagged series that we see on here. So what I want to do now is, instead of showing episode by episode, let's take a look at the seasons. And one thing we're going to have to do here is we're going to need to take the sum, because we've locked this into a 10, it's showing the sum of the ratings. We want to see the averages of them. So drop down value field settings, change that to an average, and this is the progression that we were looking for. So we can see that the series as a whole tends to peak somewhere around series 7 or 8, declines until roughly 14, and then just plateaus for around a decade. Another interesting capability of Excel in the charting, and particularly the pivot charting, is being able to break up by multiple columns. So if we want to see the episode by episode, but have a clear demarcation of when one season moved into another, instead of just relying on the axis labels, what we can do is we'll get rid of season for now. We'll drop in the episode number again, But then I'll take season and I'll put it into the legend field. What that's going to do is we can see now it views each season as a separate series, but because one ends where the other begins, you just have this changing in color for each independent season. So while it may not be the best for any one particular task, I like to look at Excel as a form of data Swiss Army knife. There's a lot it can do. There's not a big barrier to entry. There's no programming involved in anything that I just did. Even the formulas I typed in were just kind of the way I like to do things. But we're able to accomplish quite a bit. We're retrieving information from a table on a website, putting it into a format that supports the analysis that we wanted to do, and making an effective visualization of it.